Good morning. Brother Chad Long here from Delhi Baptist Church. We're in Hebrews chapter 3, and we've been looking at a comparison between Christ and Moses. Now, many things about Moses pointed to Jesus, and many things about Moses are, interestingly enough, they're comparable to Jesus. They both had an interesting birth with the threat of death. Both were laid in something other than a typical baby crib. Both had ties to a kingdom and a life of poverty and selflessness. I mean, there's a lot. I won't get into that now. I mean, Moses was raised by the king, but he was not really of that world, and Christ, and conversely, contrastly, was a king and was not really of this world. So a lot to compare and contrast. A lot of interesting facts about Moses. Well, they knew that, and that's why Paul, when he wrote to them, was sharing with them the some of the similarities, and in so doing, he's elevating Christ. He's trying to show his love and honor for Jesus. These early Hebrew Christians, assuming they really were Christians, and I mean, obviously, this letter is addressed to Jewish believers, but they were struggling with this whole notion of just letting go of the law of Moses. They were struggling with the new covenant. They were struggling with where all these things fit, and they had these Gnostic types out there telling them or trying to teach that Jesus wasn't truly God. He was some divine spirit, somebody sent by God, but he wasn't God. So it was needful. I mean, it may not be to you or me, but it was needful for them to have some of this clarified. So anyway, we've already gone over this a couple times, but I'll just pick up in verse 3, chapter 3. I know we read it already, but to read into where we're going, it says, "For this man was counted worthy of more glory than Moses, inasmuch as he who hath builded the house hath more honor than the house. Because he built all things, he's not to be held down here with a mortal man who didn't build it. He was just keeping house. You know, you don't compare the builder of the house to the housekeeper." He says, verse 4, "For every house is builded by some man, but he that built all things is God, Christ is God." So he's making the point that that's who Jesus is. And the reason I'm sitting like this is because I'm a little cold and waiting for this room to heat up. So don't think I'm trying to be indifferent with my posture. I'm just cold. I could put on a different shirt, but I've already started recording now. It says verse 5, "And Moses verily was faithful in all his house as a servant for a testimony of those things which were bespoken after." Now, in other words, the good thing about Moses is he was faithful in his house. He was a good servant, and he gave a good testimony to those that were to be spoken after. And basically, he was a good leader, and he led by example, and he taught us many things. But he taught us those things about he who would come. All of what Moses did was pointing at Jesus. So if you like Moses, you should love Jesus. Nobody here is saying get rid of Moses and embrace Jesus. They're saying embrace Moses and what he taught you and accept the fact that all of those things were about Christ. Verse 6, he says, "But Christ, as a son over his own house, whose house we are, if we hold fast the confidence and the rejoicing of the hope firm unto the end." Basically, if you've accepted these things firmly in your heart and you have this confidence in Jesus, then you belong to him. You are his house. You are what he built. You're the house of God. You're the church. You're the bride of Christ. All of these things are the same thing. He built it. He owns it. We are it. Verse 7 says, "Wherefore, as the Holy Ghost saith, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts as in the provocation in the day of temptation in the wilderness." Now this is a quote, a summarized quote from Psalm 95, 7 and 8. Now it's not verbatim, but He does carry the main point of the psalm, and it's pointing back to the time when Israel hardened their hearts against God and didn't believe Him. It was one thing to have your doubts. Even Christians have doubts. John the Baptist had doubts. John the Baptist, who proclaimed Christ, who opened the way and prepared things for Christ. John the Baptist, who was, according to Christ, one of the most faithful and most godly men. The way Jesus put it, there's never was a man born of women better than John the Baptist. So obviously a believer and a good guy, but he had doubts. He doubted so much that he sent a couple of guys to ask Jesus if he was really the guy. So we're not talking about having the occasional doubt or struggling through things. He's talking about those who have hardened their hearts, who just flat are not going to believe anything about God no matter what they see. Who, when they say, show me a sign, say it with a sneer, like it wouldn't matter if you did, I'm not going to believe it. And those are out there. Believe it or not, there are those who, if the Lord showed up Himself face to face to talk to somebody, they're still going to deny. They won't someday. One of these days, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess, but He's going to put us on our knees. But He's talking about today, those of us who have to accept Him on faith, we can or we can harden our hearts. And He's warning against this because not everybody who professes to be a believer is truly a believer. There are people in our churches, people who hear the message every week, people who claim to know Jesus who do not know Jesus. They're Christian in name only. They're Chinos, Christians in name anyway. He says, harden not your hearts as in the provocation, in the day of temptation in the wilderness. This was a time of testing. They were in the wilderness because of their own wickedness. Not all of them. And it's sad for Caleb and Joshua. It's sad for those who were willing. You know, it was only 11 days, according to somebody smarter than me. I don't know. But it was only 11 days to walk from Egypt to the Promised Land. Say 11 to 15 days for a group that size. It could be done faster. It could take longer, but roughly 2 weeks is all it would take to get from Egypt to the Promised Land with a large group of people. But it took them 40 years because there were only a handful of people who truly wanted to believe God at the time, and there was a whole lot of people who had already hardened their hearts against Him, and they weren't going to make it. So He said, don't do like them. This is the warning He gives you. Harden not your hearts as in the provocation, in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works for 40 years. Meaning over that period of 40 years, most of them, no matter what they saw, still didn't believe. He said, don't be like them. We had to let a whole other generation be born because these people, no matter what I did, wouldn't believe me. So don't be like them. Verse 10, wherefore I was grieved with that generation and said, they do always err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. The reason they err in their heart is because they never accepted Him in their heart. You have to come to a point where you surrender, and you just trust Him. You just believe Him. You don't have to know what's going on all the time. You don't have to have all your ducks in a row. You don't have to know everything. You just have to trust. You got to believe. Thank God, all God ever wanted was for us to love Him and trust Him. That's all He ever wanted, just for us to just let it go and give it to Him. And these would not. Verse 9, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years, wherefore I was grieved with that generation, and said, they do always err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. Now, there's some who think this is talking about salvation, and I don't think it is. I think this is talking about people who He's tried to reach and 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 tried to reach. The promises are forever. The invitation is not. We talked about that Sunday when we looked at Isaiah 55, where there's this big invitation. It says, ho, everyone that thirsteth, come. And He says come 3 times. And I think the Lord will ask you at least 3 times. He'll invite you at least 3 times. Some people maybe get more, some some may only get the 3, but I think there's at least 3 opportunities. I can't prove that. There may be some who said, I only heard it once ever. I just don't believe that. I think God, who's merciful and loving, will give you more than one opportunity. I think He'll give you at least 3. I think He'll say come at least 3 times. And then it's up to you to come or not come. The invitation is not eternal, but the promises are. So anyway, they tempted Him. They ignored Him. They did not trust Him. They saw His wonderful, miraculous works. They saw the pillar of the cloud. They saw the way He filled the tabernacle. They saw the way the shoes didn't wear out. They saw the way water came out of nowhere. They saw the way manna landed on the ground. They had enough to eat. Fed by quail, and they all the time just complaining. Wherefore I was grieved with that generation, said, they do always err in their heart, and they have not known my rest. So I swear in my wrath, they should not enter into my rest. Verse 12 says, take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. I happen to believe this means you never belonged to Him to start with. You're departing from a group that you've been riding with that you didn't truly belong with. Now, this is what if I'm wrong, God will judge me, but this is what I think that means. There's people sitting in churches across America. They want to fit in. They want to belong. They enjoy the company. They enjoy the music. They enjoy the service. They enjoy the social club aspect of the church, but they've never truly belonged. And they look down at their heart one day and they see that I don't believe like these people believe. I'm here, but I don't belong here. And I think that's who this is talking about. I don't believe anybody who's ever accepted Christ can go back. If you have Jesus Christ in your heart, you're filled with the Holy Spirit, you can't fit in this verse. Departing from the living God. I don't believe you can. How do you depart from He whom you're sealed with? I don't believe you can. This is talking about those who have had every opportunity, those who have walked along and seen. Judas is a good example of this. Judas walked with Jesus, saw the miracles, had all the information he needed. Those scientifically minded people who say, well, I need to see it and understand it. Well, Judas saw it. Judas saw it and he still declined. Some people just aren't going to accept it. I don't care what you do. And he says, take heed. He's trying to warn people, but some of them aren't going to hear it. Hell was not intended for hell was not intended for man, much less God's people. It was not intended for man, but there's going to be some men there. It was not intended for women, but there's going to be some women there. There's going to be some who just aren't going to hear it. And this is just a warning. This is saying, don't be like that. Trust me. Listen to me. Follow me. Love me. That's what He wants you to do. So, all right. Well, listen. Hope you guys will put your hope and faith and trust in Him. I hope you'll be more than just a housekeeper. Follow after the things that both Moses and Christ have done, because they were on the same team. This isn't really a comparison to get you to not trust one and trust the other. It's basically to understand that Moses pointed to Jesus and they're both pointed to God. So follow them, follow what the Lord wants you to follow to get to Him, and follow Him and trust Him and love Him. Y'all have a good day. We'll see you tomorrow.